Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at SBAM. And I want to start off today's show by welcoming one of our new members, Lee Machinery Movers out of Pontiac. Lee Machinery is also on their way to becoming a certified small business through our certification program. So welcome to Melissa, Dean, and her team. And of course, we're welcoming them on behalf of our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. You can learn more about them at consumerscu.org, and you can learn more about SBAM certification program on our website. So, Brian, we have quite a few topics today, and let's start with the unemployment rate. It went up again in September, but that might not be all bad.
Yeah, so you might recall that the unemployment rate below 4%. We actually went below the national rate for a couple months. Now it's back above the national rate, but you've heard me say many, many times that the unemployment rate really is not the most important aspect of the employment reports that come out. It's labor force participation, what's going on with the number of people in the workforce. And Michigan has many months in a row, 5 or 6 months in a row now, where the employment rate or the labor force participation rate has been inching up, and so it went up again. So even though total employment in Michigan did rise a bit in September, the number of people looking for work that had entered the workforce went up by more, which means that the rate went up, but the rate went up for a good reason. So workforce rose by about 23,000 people in the month of September. So that on its own is not a huge number, but when you consider that it has been inching up for 5 or 6 months, you add all that up and it makes a big difference. In fact, our labor force participation rate is now 61.6%. So still below what it was before the pandemic. And so you can look at the last 6 months and say Michigan has risen quite a bit in the last 6 months, but unlike most states, we have not caught up to our pre-pandemic labor force participation rate. But we're kind of nudging it. We're heading toward that direction finally. So that's I looked at this as actually quite good report because employment went up, labor force participation rate went up. By the way, the rate, I don't think I mentioned before, 3.9%, and that was up 0.2%. So the previous, in August, Michigan's unemployment rate was 3.7, now it's 3.9, and the national rate, just for comparison's sake, 3.8. So right there, just about at the national rate.
All right, let's move on to some strike talk. We've been covering the UAW strike for a while now, and the strike does persist, but the automakers are not the only UAW workers on strike. So who else is on strike right now?
Yeah, there are 2 other strikes that are impacting Michigan that are receiving very, very little attention. Certainly no national attention, but even here in Michigan, I've seen a few articles here and there, but not much attention. So there's some workers at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, the insurance company, that are represented by UAW that are on strike. That's a fairly small labor unit in comparison's sake. And then also casino workers in Detroit that are unionized have union agreements through the UAW. They're striking as well. So the automakers are by far the biggest, can dwarf the others, but 2 other UAW units are on the picket lines right now. I don't expect that either of these are connected. In other words, if there's progress made on the UAW auto talks, that it means somehow that different issues, whole different sets of things with those other employers. But it's worth noting, though, that strikes appear to be becoming a more common. For a while we didn't see a lot of strikes, and they're kind of like back at this point, and it popping up a little more than what we had seen at least in recent years.
And have there been any new expansions to the auto strike?
There have not. Now, it's a little bit of a complicated question because there are additional layoffs. So people would know full well by now that everything is integrated. So when the automakers stop production or have interruptions in their production in certain areas, it affects other areas. So while the UAW did not call for expanded strikes with Ford, General Motors, or Stellantis, the number of people that have been laid off went up by hundreds last week, and that does not include those that are in the supply chain, which I expect would have a much bigger collective impact overall. So the fact that there have not been expanded strikes, even though the rhetoric between the UAW leadership and the automakers seemed to kind of ramp up in recent weeks, it would send an indication that the UAW must be at least somewhat wary, or perhaps they're concerned about losing support of members who cannot afford to lose income. And the UAW strike fund, while it did have hundreds of millions of dollars in it, really with this many employees, that goes fast. So if they're making strike payments, so I think the UAW is kind of in a position where they have to think long and hard about expanding the strike officially. But by doing what they're doing, especially with Ford, where they've targeted their most profitable plant, they're being more strategic in trying to make it hurt as much as they can without having strikes that the union would have to pay for. And at this point, I'd have to say that the UAW tactics are generally working, because the automakers continue to what looks to me as though they're kind of negotiating against themselves. That it's just kind of a one-sided thing. They put out an offer, it's rejected. They up the offer, it's rejected. They up the offer, and so I think the UAW is just trying to find out where the ceiling really is.
All right, so let's talk about the automakers. General Motors has upped their offer. What is the latest there?
Yeah, from 1 week to the next, there were some mixed signals sent by General Motors. So Executive Vice President of Global Manufacturing and Sustainability, Gerald Johnson, outlined an offer and basically said that this ongoing strike would have that General Motors couldn't possibly meet all the union's demands, and that it could have a devastating impact on the company. And so at that point they had a 20% wage increase on the table, and which, for just to give you a sense for what that means, it pushes wages to $39.24 an hour for essentially on the line. And but it's also a bunch of other things that come along with it. The wage is just one piece of the puzzle. And so it was kind of like posturing as though they'd gone just as far as they could go. And then last week, though, General Motors put a bigger offer on the table, moving their wage increase up to 25%. So an auto worker would make about $83,000 a year. They also included bigger profit sharing checks, although if they're giving higher wages, the profits, of course, would be less, but bigger profit sharing cut. They in a proposal to increase the 401k match, and then a handful of other things, including how overtime works, just a lot of things that are on the table. So General Motors actually came to the table after the previous week, kind of signaling they'd gone as far as they could go, and actually pretty big increase. I mean, that's a 25%, going to 25% raise is a 25% over increase over what the previous raise was proposed at. So it went from 20% to 25. That's a pretty big move. And so you would at that point, if you're the president of the UAW, Shawn Fain, and you look at it and say, well, the automakers were saying that they couldn't go any further last week, and this week we got an offer that's 25% higher than the offer we got last week. Then, well, I suppose that would inspire you to hold out a little longer and see if there's another offer that would come after that. And that seems to be the cycle that we're in. Honestly, I don't see much sign that that there's any kind of agreement around the table, around the corner here.
All right, let's talk about Ford. They have taken a bit of a different approach. What's their strategy?
Yeah, Ford has, they have taken a different approach, and it's been one to kind of, you know, not in so many words, but kind of like drawing a line in the sand. And so we saw the executive chairman, Bill Ford, put out some, make a speech and put out some statements. And it was kind of trying to appeal to the idea of finding an agreement. So I copied here a quote, Bill Ford saying, "This should not be Ford versus the UAW. It should be Ford and the UAW versus Toyota, Honda, Tesla, and all the Chinese companies that want to enter our home market." And in response to that, Sean Fain said, the UAW said, "The days of the UAW and Ford being a team to fight other companies are over." A very absolute statement, kind of a shocking one too, not in the interest of the UAW members to not work in tandem with the company and winning the competition out there. So that was a bit of a surprise, and Ford has not put another offer on the table. So they are sticking to the previous offer that they had on the table, and they said they can't give any more without it costing them in the future, and in terms of their market share, the ability to compete, and the overall long-term health and viability of the company. And one has to wonder how much room they really have to give. And so who's right? You know, General Motors is going a little further. Ford's saying, look, this is as far as we can go. Keep in mind, in the background of all this, the government is pushing them to move toward electrification, which they are not making money on. They make money on the gas vehicles. They lose money. They literally lose money on every electric vehicle that they sell. So there's that whole transition's happening in the background too, where the companies are like, well, consumers aren't buying electric like we thought, or like the government thought that they were going to, and they don't make as much on those, and so that has to cover the gas vehicle sales, have to cover the loss of the electric vehicle sales, and the overall cost of the company is going to go up. It does make one wonder what this means for the long-term health and the viability of automotive companies. So who's right? Is Ford's approach right? Is General Motors right that they had more to give and put an offer on the table? Well, you know, maybe we just look back in history and see that General Motors went bankrupt and Ford didn't. And so, you know, when you think about that type of the type of approach that Ford has taken over time, in terms of just the long-term viability of the company without needing any sort of government bailout, that it would suggest that, you know, Ford at least has a history of knowing where to draw lines. So I guess we'll see whether or not Ford comes to the table with an additional offer now that General Motors has. And my understanding is that Stellantis did too, but the details of that are not known outside the negotiations. The fact that two of the three companies put out additional offers and Ford is trying to hold the line where they were a couple of weeks ago, I think the pressure will mount on them to find a way. But ultimately, here's the thing, Sarah, is I think what's going to happen is eventually they'll settle a deal, and a couple of things will happen. It will drive Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis toward more automation, just because they have to somehow reduce costs. They'll drive them toward quicker development or quicker deployment of automation, because the cost benefit of that changes. So it makes it more worth it for them to do it now. And they will squeeze their suppliers more. So everybody in the supply chain below them are the ones that are going to be expected to cover some of these costs. So a lot of the smaller companies, now small auto suppliers are still pretty big, but I mean, most of them are. but the companies in the supply chain are really, I think, going to be the ones that are expected to figure out how to reduce their cost in order to make it possible to fund these contracts without the companies making themselves completely uncompetitive with players like Kia, for example, or Hyundai, not to mention the more traditional competitors like Toyota.
All right, well, it's certainly something we'll keep reporting on and have another update on Thursday. So let's move to a little drama in DC where the battle for leadership continues. Are we any closer to having a Speaker of the House?
All right, so on Thursday, we did the briefing before Jim Jordan pulled out of the race. So you had Kevin McCarthy first, who won the conference vote, the Republican caucus vote, but couldn't get votes to become Speaker. Never even got a conference vote, just kind of pulled back from it. Steve Scalise, who won the conference vote, but couldn't get votes to be Speaker, and actually that one never went to a vote. He backed out knowing he couldn't get there. Then Jim Jordan was next, more from the right side of the political spectrum within the Republican Party, so the right side of the political party. He won the conference, went up for a vote 3 times, and was moving further away with each vote from having support. Then the conference said, all right, you're done. And so now what? It's like wide open. Now there are 9 people that are running for Speaker. And in the Congress right now, it's a time when like there is a Speaker pro tem. And the Speaker pro tem's main job right now is to run the floor to elect a new Speaker. I thought last week there might be a chance that the House would change the rules, give the Speaker pro tem more authority so that the Speaker pro tem could essentially operate like the regular Speaker. But they appear to have moved away from that. So that is not, that doesn't appear to be on the table anymore. Instead, it's wide open. There are 9 people that have thrown their heads in the ring to run for Speaker, including one from Michigan. So Michigan's first congressional district, which is all of the UP and then the tip of the Met, Jack Bergman. So Jack Bergman was in the United States Army and retired as a general. So General Bergman, been in Congress, I think he's in his 4th term now, and he's thrown his hat in the ring. So none of the people running are like really high profile, the ones that most people outside of their respective areas across the country would know. So it does really feel like it's wide open. So whether or not General Bergman has a shot at winning, it's hard to say. Great guy though. Somebody who's always been very responsive and good to SBAM and our members. And so whether or not it's in the dice really for a shot at becoming Speaker, I don't know. But we do have one Michigan candidate that's in the race. So they'll try to build support within their Republican conference, they call it. They have the majority, so they're the ones who, normally how it works is that group will choose who the Speaker is going to be. Whoever has the majority, they'll choose who the Speaker is going to be. And then they go out on the floor and everybody gets on board and votes for that person. It's just not the way it's working now, where there's Republicans, the more moderate Republicans and the more, the far right side of the Republican Party, they can't agree on who that Speaker would be. And so that's maybe somebody a little more obscure, somebody that's not as famous and hasn't burned bridges or made as many enemies. Maybe somebody a little more anonymous would actually be able to get the votes to become the next Speaker. But in the backdrop of all this is international turmoil and strife, and there's always an expectation that the U.S. will play some sort of a leadership role when it comes to conflict overseas, especially conflict that involves allies. So we do have, of course, Israel. The president was over in Israel and expressing the support for a long-term ally and the actions that are being taken there. But then there's also Ukraine and Russia. And really, there's only so much that the U.S. military and the Biden administration can do in terms of their activities there without Congress being able to essentially appropriate resources. So that's where things stand today. And it's really hard to, I mean, there's nothing that would tell me that they're right around that the Republicans are right around the corner from being able to pick a speaker. But it's just, it would be nearly unprecedented for something to go on this long, at least in recent times. So hopefully pressure mounts and they'll get back to business sometime soon.
Okay, let's talk about what's happening here in Michigan, where there is now a growing expectation that the legislature will adjourn early. When are we talking? How soon might they be done?
Yeah, this probably the second week in November. Normally what would happen is the legislature, it always breaks for the second half of November. That's normal. So November 15th, always before November 15th, and then not coming back until the beginning of December. And usually there's some cleanup work, legislative work to do between September and the end of the year. And then they close down the session for the year, usually between Christmas and New Year's. And the senators aren't in between, and the representatives are not in between Christmas and New Year's, but there's like an administrative procedure called sine die to adjourn finally for a final time for the end of the year. And that is normally right at the end of the year. This is probably going to happen in the second week of November so that presidential primary can happen on February 27th. So in order to pull that off, they would need to be done in November. Really, they could go through the end of November, but like I said, they never do the second half week of November. It's just not in the cards. November 15th through after Thanksgiving, they're out anyway. So that's why all expectations are they'll finish maybe by the 8th or the 9th of November, and they will be done for the year. So as you've heard us talk about all these issues that we're concerned about, there is definitely activity, rumblings, rumors, things kind of ramping here in the last couple of weeks of session, and or what is believed to be the last couple of weeks of session. If we can just make it through these next few weeks without anything bad happening, we'll probably be okay until late January or early February before they really get back to legislating. So we'll see, but whether watching this you feel that they deserve a vacation or not, it sure would be nice if they closed down the legislature early and gave us a break from all of these proposals that are flying at business owners so quickly these days.
All right, and now I think you have a Data Monday report for us.
Yeah, I'm going to share a Data Monday that leans into the real estate market quite a bit here. So the first thing is the amount that a home buyer that would need to have to afford an average house in America is now at the highest level ever. So you would have to make $115,000 a year in order to afford a home, an average home in the U.S. It's never been so high, and it's gone up quite a bit percentage-wise over the last few years. Also wanted to share that the housing unit starts. So there's an index that keeps track of how many new housing units start under construction. And it looked like that was going to rebound a little bit and then started falling again. So houses under construction have started to fall. I think this is going to fall further as the expectations for higher interest rates over a long period of time start to, those expectations are increasing. So if you look like historically, it's not as low as it was back in the crash of 2008-9, but and keep in mind, this is not housing prices. These are new housing units started. under construction. But just give you an idea that, there's a housing shortage and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. And then the MBA, the Mortgage Bankers Association, has an index that is a purchase index. So how many applications are coming in to purchase a new house, or to purchase a house, not just a new house, but purchase a house. And that is actually down as low as it's been since the early, the mid part of the 1990s. So really, really low. Not surprising, given that interest rates are up higher and inventory is down. So not as many houses on the market, and overall costs are pretty high. And then on the flip side, though, total multi-units under construction are way up. So they are really at about the all-time high at this point. And you have to go all the way back to the 1970s, the early 1970s, since you saw the type of new construction at this level. So not quite as high as last month, but really pretty high. And then I just wanted to share, as the 10-year Treasury yield, the long-term Treasury yield has been increasing. Depending on how high it goes, what it might mean for unemployment rate. And so there's a fairly consistent relationship that when the 10-year Treasury yields go up, so people putting their money away for longer at higher yields, that capital is kind of taken out of the market, taken out of the stock market, taken out of the market for other capital deployment. It has an impact on the unemployment rate. And so looking at all of the different projections, either a slightly to a more substantial increase in the interest rate, or the unemployment rate could very well be in our future, given what we see with respect to the Treasury yields that are being projected. So just a little bit of insight, mainly there in the housing market. The cost of capital is definitely impacting several different areas, and then at the same time, though, you might recall from last week's Data Monday that the inflation, though, is still a concern. So it's kind of the case where we're paying ramifications on one side. We've seen some improvement at the inflationary pressures, but then we seem to be kind of stuck without getting to our target inflation rates, which means that higher borrowing costs will likely persist for the foreseeable future. So that's what we got for today's Data Monday. I did want to mention, I happen to be at Brown Iron Brew House in Royal Oak, so it's right on Woodward. And I'm here because SBAM has an owner-to-owner networking meeting. So just for business owners that want to come and hang out with some other business owners between 4 and 6 on Brown Iron Brew House in Royal Oak. It's not, if you happen to be in Oakland County, it's not too late. Please, even if you didn't register, come on in. We'd love to have you.
All right, good plug for tonight's event, Brian. I hope everyone has a great week. We'll be back here on Thursday.
See you on Thursday, everybody.